Good morning or good afternoon to those of you, and thank you for joining today's exclusive bonus webinar that we have today, Accelerating the Value from a Process Framework, What You Need to Know and Consider Before Utilizing MOSAIQ. So before we get started today, I just wanted to let everyone know that we will be taking questions at the end of the session, and we will be taking them live. So if you have anything that you would like to ask, please use the Q&A or the chat feature in GoTo, and I will unmute your line so you can ask your questions over the phone. And our wonderful presenters, Jeff and Cindy here, will be more than happy to answer your questions. So speaking of our presenters, we have Cindy Hubert with us. Cindy is the Executive Director of Client Solutions. Cindy, do you want to introduce yourself and Jeff?
I will do so. Hi, everyone. It is so nice to be with you guys, and thank you, Sarah. I'm sort of, it's like photobombing. I'm jumping in on Jeff's webinar. He is the main feature, but for those of you who know me know that I have spent 2 decades in this world of knowledge management, waving the banner for that. But secretly, I'm a process junkie, and one of the reasons is because without great standard workflows and people understanding how things work, it's really hard to help knowledge flow. And that's been my main focus for these last 2 decades. But there's also so much happening in the world of process. And so I'm just here to be Jeff's wingman, or I guess I should say roadie, and just ask him a lot of questions along with you and give you some of my observations and perspectives. Oh, and by the way, I am, as Sarah said, I'm with Client Solutions, which we spend time connecting our members' needs with the content and the services they need, and that's why I spend a lot of time with Jeff Varney. So, Jeff, I'll turn it over to you.
Outstanding. Well, good morning and good afternoon to everyone. Thanks, Cindy. So I think I know several of you that are on the phone today, but if I haven't met you, Jeff Varney, I lead our advisory services group here at APQC, and I have been extremely active in process and process management for the better part of 10 years at APQC, and I've done it 20 years prior to that and out in organizations like yours. So, you know, in that role, the concept of a process framework and the value that it provides in a number of different ways has been evident from day one. And so within our advisory services group, when we try to work with individual organizations, helping them to understand when and how they can use a framework, and then how they can apply tools and techniques around that to drive the benefit of process and process management to the business itself. That's what we're all about. And so when we talk about MOSAIQ as an environment, as a tool that helps you to do more with the framework, better, faster, cheaper, so to speak, there's also a context that says we need to understand where and how we want to use MOSAIQ or a framework overall, and set ourselves up for success so that we're doing it in a way that meets some of those best practices of process management and allows you to not diverge, but rather bring the organization and people together and get that benefit of accelerating the value of your framework itself. So that's the whole goal of today's webinar, is to talk through some of the key points about that and maybe have that conversation with you. So I'm going to go ahead, and there's some slides here. I'm going to go through those, some of them quickly, some of them I'll kind of pause a little bit on, and we'll hopefully get through that with plenty of time for just open question and answer, as Sarah said. So let me make sure I can accelerate or move the screen forward here. There we go. So just as a high-level overview, APQC, through our research and experience one-on-one with organizations, has really understood that process and process management are very powerful. And some organizations do it very well, and some organizations struggle in putting together some systematic and sustainable approach to their processes. So what we've learned over time is that there's really 5 phases, life cycle phases. You have to understand how you're going to manage and support your processes. This is the circle in the upper right. You have to identify and organize what processes you are going to manage in the business. That's where a framework comes in. Capture the process knowledge and design and document. Actually perform and manage the work through the processes and monitor and control and understand how well you're doing. And then the improve and integrate to close the loop on good process behavior and really getting the benefit from process. So what we've also uncovered is the 7 tenets of process management. I think many of you have learned about those in the past, and they're depicted at the bottom, that these 7 characteristics of well-managed process-based organizations: aligned to strategy, they have process governance understood, they actually have process models like a framework and that process knowledge I mentioned in a usable, accessible form, et cetera, et cetera. And so today I'm not going to go into great detail on the 7 tenets other than to use them contextually in the concept of how do you take a framework and accelerate the value of that framework, and in particular, how you can do that through a good application or use of MOSAIQ. So what is a process framework? Hopefully this isn't a big question for any of you, but in the context of APQC, in most cases, we look at that process framework as a catalog or list of mutually exclusive, collectively exhaustive, and hierarchically decomposed processes that exist in your organization. They're what you do, starting with very high-level concepts like strategy and vision, down to very low-level, which might be taking the enterprise or organization strategy and now translating that into a department or individual resource person's strategy within the business. So it takes you from high level to low level. That's the hierarchical decomposition. And breaking it up into smaller and more manageable pieces, more manageable what we do chunks that you can then allocate to departments or functions or folks to then understand, design, and perform effectively. The mutually exclusive says each process, each what you do only shows up once. So you don't repeat the same what you do multiple times and have different people designing it different ways, managing it different ways. So it helps to get you some continuity of what we do, rally the different people that might do that actual work, and it doesn't mean that you can't do it differently. You can have different variations of those processes, but it's still the same process. What we do is the same. How we do it might be different, department to department, function to function. And that's a decision now that if we all agree we're doing this same work, what? But we recognize and communicate how we're doing it differently, we can decide, do we want to standardize or do we want to allow those variations because there's good local business rationale for the variations. But it now makes that visible and you can facilitate the conversation through everyone agreeing we all are doing the same what. Now, should we do it the same or not? So the framework is very powerful, and I just gave you one of those powerful uses, which is simply to connect people doing similar work and facilitate the awareness and the conversation. So I'm going to keep moving on here. We can talk more about good frameworks and not so good frameworks later, but again, I think most of you have a good foundation there already. Now, when we think about the framework itself, and at APQC, the process classification frameworks are compliant with those characteristics on the previous page. What we find is that we believe it links or connects the enterprise. Similar to what I just said. If we understand what we do, the framework, which is in the middle of this diagram, then the question can become, well, who does it? And that's really your org chart, your roles, responsibilities, etc. And there's not a one-to-one between the organization chart and a role and the process. As I just mentioned, you can have multiple people, different people in the org chart that still have to do the same work. All right? They all have to execute the same what for their particular department, function, etc. So it allows you to connect who has to do the work with what work they're doing. The same thing if you look at the lower left corner of this. What are the tools and the technologies and the applications that support doing that work? So we can now map our system and information data architecture to what work is being done. We can look at it as to how do we measure the performance of our organization and connect how are we measuring and what that means back to what work we're actually doing. And the same thing on the upper right here, how we do it, policies, processes, standards, all those constraints and requirements and needs for how we actually do the work can then be captured. And that's that depth of process knowledge and standards and lessons learned and best practices and that bigger knowledge that Cindy talked about in connecting all we know about our processes, both what's written down and what's in people's heads. Where are the experts and how do we know how to get to them if we're talking about a particular type of work we do? So we see that the framework, the PCF, or any framework you choose to use, can connect the enterprise in these ways. Now, MOSAIQ and MOSAIQ Accelerator are two of the offerings from APQC. MOSAIQ itself, for all members, is a free, usable environment and tool, and you can choose the term you want there, that allows you to set up, customize, and tailor and manage through a process framework. And I'll have a few slides here to talk about that a little bit more. The goal for today isn't to really just go in and show you how to use MOSAIQ and all of its features, but we're certainly happy to entertain those types of questions as we get to the Q&A session. MOSAIQ Accelerator is really a slightly different view, which says if we have a framework or we want to use a framework in our organization, how do we do that effectively? How do we use a framework, and how do we use MOSAIQ, the environment and tool, to accelerate and do more with our framework in our organization? So this gets more into those 7 tenets of process management. What are the strategies, or how do we want to use MOSAIQ and a framework? All right, who's going to be involved? What's the governance? Can we change the framework, and who's allowed to change the framework in MOSAIQ or outside of MOSAIQ? So there's a number of questions that you need to think through to say, how are we going to use this in our organization? Who, what, how do we measure? Back to that previous picture, if we understand the framework and now we've got an environment and tool to do it better, we still have to know who's doing it, the people component, how we're going to measure it, whether it's effective or not, the performance piece, the technology itself, how do we set it up and manage this MOSAIQ environment for your use? So all those questions need to be thought through so that you can set it up, define the rules, and engage the workforce in using MOSAIQ and in an effective way within your business. Whether you're using MOSAIQ or using some other tool, you have other enterprise tools that allow you to use the framework, the same questions need to be answered for a framework in general, and then even more important if you're doing that through MOSAIQ. So you can really use this process of Accelerator to take you through that structured thought process, design how you're going to use a framework in MOSAIQ, put it into place, and now support the business in doing it effectively. And that's what Accelerator is about. It's more of a thought process to tie how you're going to manage your processes through a framework and with MOSAIQ. So getting started in MOSAIQ, hopefully most of you have been in there and poked around and have seen the tool. It's pretty simple. I just want to mention real quick here, MOSAIQ version 2.0 will be coming out at the end of the month. Some significant enhancements there. It's much faster and more reliable. It's got a more intuitive user interface. And one of the critical new features is that it allows you to have read-only users so that they can't change what's in there, but they can access it and leverage the benefits. So it provides some of that access control that wasn't in version 1. So that will be available, the rollout's at the end of this month. So moving forward from MOSAIQ itself, here's a few views here. The concepts of manage, measure, and learn. Manage is defining and setting up what processes, and for each of those processes, what's all of that process knowledge, the flow charts, the lessons learned, and other content that you would want associated with it, and putting that all into the Manage tab so that you've got that aggregator of process knowledge, and you can navigate to a process and then see all of that content, whether it's on the cloud-based MOSAIQ itself or simply a link to a directory or SharePoint site or other system of record within your protected environment inside your firewall of your organization. The measure ties it into now benchmarks and performance, and it's connected to APQC's benchmarking portal so that you can now quickly see live feed from our portal the associated measures and metrics and compare then to other industry or regional or size of organization comparisons to see how you're performing relative to them. And then the Learn ties it into our APQC knowledge base, which is really there to connect you to the most recent best practice research, white papers, and reports about that process that are related to that process. So again, hopefully you understand the features of MOSAIQ, and questions will be coming at the end. Now, why use MOSAIQ is really the question that comes up quite often. All right, it's a cool tool. It's an environment that allows me to do a number of things, but why should I use MOSAIQ? And you can also change this to why should I use a process framework? Well, it, one, helps you to have that catalog or list of what we do that is consistent across the organization, connecting those different groups, IT to the people on the org chart and within the business, to the process experts, and having them all talk to the same pieces, the same things, what we do. And from that, you can now build more structured, cross-functional or end-to-end process views by stitching those pieces together. I talk about it as being the building blocks or the Lego set of these are the processes. How do I connect them together? So you can create views of connected processes and have those customized views in MOSAIQ so that anybody related to order to cash can go and look at the order to cash framework view and see all the processes and all the process collateral and connect to the benchmarks and the best practice research at APQC in a very quick and easy to use fashion. Governance, assigning process owners and connecting this back to the org chart. And it's a great way, as we talked in that earlier view, to start to connect who does the work to maybe who owns that process to where is all that process knowledge, what are the associated tools, what are the views of performance that we want to have for the business. Identifying key knowledge, and this is Ms. Cindy's very in tune with this, is if we understand what work we do and who's doing it, now the question is how do we take the knowledge, what's in their heads, what's captured in their documents on projects or on team level, and get that into the other people that can benefit from that same knowledge. Whether it's a new hire that you want to onboard, whether it's where you've got a challenge with people retiring, and understanding what is the critical knowledge that we need for the steps in that process, and how do we now make sure that that's accessible and transferred to the people that need it. So that knowledge element is very huge in connecting people and ensuring that you can perform the work, actually get it done by leveraging if we all agree on what, and we can store and access that content about it, or we know who to go and talk to by pointing people to the right experts. Now people can onboard, they can make change faster and really tune towards doing the work in the most effective way. A few more on here, benchmarking, tying back into those external views, but you can also compare internally different departments, functions, or business units within your organization and use the structure. Capturing and linking those lessons learned, right? Hey, we just finished the 6th time that we performed this process, and we realized that this step here can be risky, and if we do these things, we eliminate the risk, and it's much more effective, and our customers happier. So now you can capture and share that because you can have people now have visibility that are performing the same type of work through going into MOSAIQ, looking at that process, and now seeing that lesson learned you've captured and stored right there in an easy, accessible form. Content management, it's really all about that, putting the process knowledge, all the various aspects in one place, at least the links to all that knowledge in one place. So when someone says, I need to perform this work, I know what it is, here I can go and see all the different ways or how it can be done, who's doing it, the lessons learned, etc. So bringing in, aggregating all of that process knowledge and content in one easy to orchestrate how to get to it form. And then this collaborative problem-solving environment, which I mentioned a moment ago, which really gets back to that concept of if I have a work group, whether it's a team or a program or project, or if I have a new initiative, a strategic initiative, where I'm going to go and look at a key set of processes or a function or a new business capability, well, I can create a view inside of MOSAIQ that says these are the associated work processes that are part of your scope. Now you have visibility into all of the collateral, and you can actually start to create future state content. Here's 5 different options for how we can redesign this part of the process and store it there from a team perspective so that they can collaborate, iterate, and then get to that final. And once they've got to a final solution, part of that would be to deploy that out to the business and going back into your enterprise framework view and now publishing that content as the new process knowledge. So it's a fabulous way to organize around solving problems and communicating now solutions to the bigger organization for consistent, sustainable execution. So that was a longer preamble than I planned, but hopefully that gives you some different views of what and how you would want to use a framework and potentially how MOSAIQ could help you and accelerate or make that more powerful in your business. So what does it mean then to go and actually drive towards setting up and using MOSAIQ? And that's the rest of the presentation here that I'll go through, and then we'll get to Q&A. And in doing so, the question is, are you ready? Are you ready? And it comes back to the 7 tenets of process management, right? The foundation for process management typically is strategic alignment. Are we focused on what's important? And have we aligned to who in the business cares about that or does the work. We can't do this to them. We have to do this with them. We have to help them to improve their own execution of the work through better understanding and organization. Governance. What are the rules and approaches that we're going to follow? If we do use MOSAIQ, who is allowed to change the structure of the framework? Who's allowed to create a new project view for that initiative so they have their own little workspace and it's not changing or manipulating the currently published and standard process knowledge around how you're doing that work today. So there's some thinking through how you're going to use a framework in MOSAIQ and the governance to make it consistent and structured so that people don't diverge and start to step on each other's toes and it becomes confusing or cluttered, or worse, it actually gets the wrong process knowledge out to people so that they're doing the wrong thing. We've got 4 options here. None of them have been approved, but yet if people see that and think that they can go off and do the work that way, we've now miscommunicated and caused problems rather than causing solutions. So that foundational, what do we do there, we have to think through and make sure we're set up to use the framework in MOSAIQ effectively. And then obviously, in using MOSAIQ, how do we communicate when there is a change? How do we let people know that there is this environment and they can access key process knowledge? And if they have a change and they're not authorized to make the change themselves, who do they then submit that to so it can be reviewed, vetted, and actually published to everyone else across the business? How do we actually measure our performance and use the tool effectively, et cetera here. So the 7 tenets are the types of things that things we need to consider and make some design decisions and answer the questions on to use MOSAIQ effectively in our organization. So the accelerator, MOSAIQ Accelerator, is really a 5-step process which we assess how are we using it, framework, and how do we want to use MOSAIQ. And by understanding what we're doing today and how we want it to work in the future, now we can bring together a core group of people and train them in how to actually set up and manage and use the environment we want. That then leads into designing your solution. Here is the additional governance documentation we need to put in place. The rules for who can go into MOSAIQ and actually create. Who will be read-only versus edit capabilities inside of the MOSAIQ tool. How do you suggest a change to the framework? We need to add an element or move an element or break an element apart in the framework. So thinking through what you need to do, the assess should help you to say what we need to do. The design then is making the decisions and saying, here's how we're going to do it using MOSAIQ and the framework. And then implementing that, the 4th phase here, which talks about, all right, now let's put that in place and get any training and any communications and a deployment plan for how we get that into the hands of the people that are actually now going to use the framework and MOSAIQ. And that gets to the final support phase there, which is, we can't just throw it at them and hope they're successful. How are we going to provide subject matter expertise, administrative support, or any other kind of sustainable support to the business so they use it well and they get the value? We're truly accelerating the business benefits. So part of that assessment, the very first phase, is what we call a health check. There's a set of structured questions that, and areas to evaluate. A few of those you can see on the screen here, right? Do we know all current frameworks used within our business, right? For instance, you may be using one or more of the APQC PCFs, but the IT group might be using ITIL or COBIT. You might have the SCORE model being used by supply chain. There's numerous frameworks out there. Some of them are comprehensive. They cover the entire business, like our PCFs. Some of them cover a particular function or specialty, like the ITIL for IT, that really talks about information technology processes itself and capabilities. So the question is, what are all of those, and how are they going to fit together, right? And for each of these areas that you need to assess in the health check, you can say, are we ready, but there's some risks? We've got too many frameworks, and we're going to have to figure out how to make them fit together effectively. Or are we ready to go? Ready to do it? We're green, full speed ahead. We know that. We've got the answers. So now it's a matter of how do we simply use MOSAIQ effectively to do that better. All right, so there's a long health check that we can go through, a number of questions. What's our governance? How do we use frameworks today? Which frameworks do we use? How do we change frameworks in the future if we need to? What are the templates and tools and naming standards for process knowledge that would be linked to and accessible through what we do, these elements of the framework that you can now set up in MOSAIQ. A number of questions that assessment looks at. It's basically a readiness check. Are we ready to move forward and actually start to design and implement and support MOSAIQ and its use in our business? Or are there things we need to do before we're ready? With that, then, we find that it's really important to bring together a design team that's going to help to set up MOSAIQ, whether that is to actually go into MOSAIQ and do some administrative structuring the framework that you want people to work to setting up some peer groups of read-only groups versus author or edit access groups. Some of that blocking and tackling that you would need to do to be ready to use that itself. So bringing together the people that are going to help us to set up and then sustain the use of the framework through MOSAIQ is we bring them together and start with some training. Here's what you're going to need to do to set up and manage and work together to provide this context for the framework and MOSAIQ in our business. And so that training brings them all kind of to a level set. And also says, here's the design decisions now you're going to need to make based on the assessment. And here's what you're actually going to need to set up and implement. And here's the support services that you're all going to need to agree how you're going to do that to sustain the use of MOSAIQ going forward. So it's all about process management here, not about individual process, if you want to look at it that way. And it's a huge part of governance. And once we've done that training and brought them up to speed, now it's to sit down with them as a team and say, let's make those design decisions. Are we going to restrict everybody into a single framework, or are we going to allow multiple frameworks? And if there are multiple frameworks, is there any constraint on what can be created and who can create them, and how they're managed, and how information or knowledge, that process knowledge, may flow from one framework to the other? Are they mutually exclusive and completely independent, or are they interconnected? And there's different techniques inside of MOSAIQ to manage each of those two options. So those are the types of design questions that hopefully were identified during the assess that need to actually be made by your core team to set the environment up, etc. So that design phase, making all the decisions, deciding how you're going to use it, who's going to do what, etc., is really critical. The next phase then is to actually make those changes, set it up, pre-populate with content. If there are roles of people that will be trainers or process champions, training them in advance before you deploy it to the business so they know how you want to use it in your organization. They've got the relative skills. They understand the expectations on them for what they will do to provide this real coordinated use of MOSAIQ going forward. So implementation is actually getting ready to deploy and put it to that accelerated value. And then obviously you get to support. All right, making sure that you're promoting and supporting and engaging the business when appropriate, helping them to do it better, faster, cheaper, and do it in a correct, consistent way. So they're not trying to figure out how to use this tool and how to use the framework. You're guiding them to doing that towards targeted business value creation. And that's the support. So it's not, again, back to we don't just set it up and throw it and say, hey, everybody, here it is, go be successful. But we know how we want to use it, part of the assess and design. We've set it up to use it that way, and now we're engaging the business to actually be effective in driving that value. So that's MOSAIQ Accelerator and the steps you should take within your organizations if you truly want to tie the use of a framework and MOSAIQ towards targeted business value, rather than here's a tool, everybody go use it your own way, doing it in an integrated, coordinated fashion that drives sustainable process management and the benefits, like the well-process managed organizations we've studied, basically bringing those inside your organization. One of the things we've found is that as you look at that, and we can look at process management maturity using those same 7 tenets, if without MOSAIQ, you may find that there's some struggles. You know, we've defined the use of a framework, but it's awkward. It's in an Excel file, or we created a SharePoint structure over here, or it's inside of an Eris or Provision or iGraphics, or pick your favorite process management tool set out there. And we set it up inside of there, but it's limited access because not everybody in the organization has direct access to go in there and populate and do other things. So through the use of MOSAIQ, we can now find that you can make accessible to anyone in your organization greater access and, where appropriate, greater control to capture, share, and improve that process knowledge. And also then connect that to the external best practices and lessons learned that are available, and benchmarks, as I mentioned, through APQC's portals and knowledge base. So with that, what you end up with is the ability to not only accelerate the value, but the maturity and the structure and the approach of how you're doing that back to, again, a more consistent and sustainable way of using and applying process best practices within your organization. So at that point, we've gone about 34 minutes, and we really, that's the target I had here. I went pretty quickly there. But we really want to open it up to Q&A and get your questions. So at this point, Sarah, I'm not sure if you've got some questions that have already flowed in, or we want to go ahead and open up the floor here. But let's just have a conversation for the next 20 to 30 minutes and see if we can answer your specific questions.
Hey, Jeff, it's Cindy, and I know we've got, I'm going to give everybody time to think. My question to all of you is are you using this in a full force or limited way yet as part of your continuous improvement? And Jeff, just an observation, when you were talking about the various uses of it, one of the ways that we are seeing MOSAIQ really supporting knowledge management efforts via process is through a couple of ways. If you've got communities, it seems to be a really good way to get your communities connected and very focused, aligned to the business, whether it's a domain or a functional area or a process. And we're also seeing, and I think, Andrew Muris, you're on, and I know you've done tremendous work in your lifetime around lessons learned. We're seeing a lot of people starting to use the MOSAIQ feature to embed lessons learned in workflows. So getting them accustomed to workflows and then embedding it. So I'd be interested in hearing if you're doing that, or anybody else on the phone, of what you guys have going on with that. We're just looking for cool ways to use MOSAIQ that really helps us. And we open lines?
We don't have the lines open now, but I'm going to unmute everybody from the organizers' end.
Good. So
you can speak up on the phone if you'd like. If you don't have any questions or anything to say, you can mute your line on your own. So I'm unmuting everyone now.
Jeff and I think the conversation. Mute yourself. Good deal. Thank you.
Oh, any burning questions? It's an open forum at this point. If not, I certainly can add and expand in a couple of areas, so point me back where you'd like to hear more.
Good.
But we'd rather target what you're interested in, what your challenges are, rather than continuing to talk at you.
Hey, Andrew, are you on? This is Cindy.
Yes, I am, but can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, well, I did just submit a question here. We haven't been using really MOSAIQ to date. However, we have done process modeling in some of our shared services efforts, and because that's much more of a process-oriented, you might say, function at times. And I was wondering if you'd seen much in that arena, or if you have other case studies that you'll be publishing about MOSAIQ.
Good question, Jeff. Anything? It does seem plausible that shared services would really pick this up because of the standard needs.
Absolutely. And Andrew, great to talk to you again. It's been, well, I think I saw you at least once last year. I'll go to your second part of the question first, as far as new case studies and new content. And we're constantly working to gather and publish more. So through the MOSAIQ site on our web, you'll see each of that content as it comes online. But if there's some specific things you're looking for, Andrew, by all means, reach out to myself or Sarah or Cindy or John Tesmer. Let us know what you're interested in, and we'll let you know if we've got some specific content. And if not, we may know, because we have a tremendous kind of network of people using frameworks and MOSAIQ, and we'll go out and find some folks for you to learn from. So don't be shy about asking those targeted questions when you have them.
And
that's
Jeff,
the first question. Oh, yes, go ahead.
I was just going to let you know that we just published a case study that was done with ProUnitas with MOSAIQ, so that is on the knowledge base now, so people can search for that. So, Andrew, to your point, we do have a case study for MOSAIQ right now, and like Jeff said, we are constantly working to get more on our knowledge base.
The challenge there is many people are still learning how to use it and use it effectively. With some of the same challenges I talked through. Have we thought through? Have we set up our governance? Do we have the right trained people? Do we have a structure for how we want one or multiple frameworks within the tool and how they connect? So as they go through that and as they're discovering their approach, they're not all willing to share as early until they've got a strong story. So we're working with them, we're helping them, they're helping us, and as we have and we can convince them to share their story, we'll continue to publish that content for you. So back to your first part of the question, Andrew. When it comes to shared services, and when you think shared service, whether they've got a distributed workforce, but that shared service where they work and they've standardized around core processes, it's absolutely an area where the framework and MOSAIQ is effective. And we've worked hand in hand with a number of organizations that are shared services, whether it's a shared service around finance or it's around human capital management or it's around some aspect of supply chain, purchasing, logistics, etc. We've worked with them to uncover how they can leverage this broader enterprise process framework and the elements within that to clearly target what work they do, but more importantly, how the work they do connects to other parts of the business. Why that enterprise framework is powerful. We can now show the connections between their work, what they do, and what we do to support them. And on the other end, if you think about a SIPOC, or my inputs are coming from some other process, my outputs are going to some other process in many cases, whether it's inside the organization or outside. So understanding the connectivity between elements in the framework, being able to map those and understand what is the content and the knowledge and the benchmarks and the best practices for them very quickly accessible through this structured MOSAIQ framework. So it's very powerful to create a view that represents that shared service, but it's even more powerful within that view to know how it connects to other processes across the business and how they work together. So that's one of the quick answers I can give you, but I'd love to get on the phone, you and I can talk at some point, and I can give you more specific examples that relate to the types of shared services you're seeing.
Well, thank you, Jeff. I appreciate it. Look forward. Maybe we can set up a time to talk further.
Perfect.
So guys, I'm just curious in terms of, why you joined this call and what you were hoping to get out of it. Let us know, because we've got time and don't want to, as I said, Jeff and I can fill up a lot of airtime for those of you who know us, and I think all of you know us. So please let us know what your specific questions are. If we need to go into something deeper, we can. As I said, my biggest, Jeff is right, as I've gone through just my learnings around MOSAIQ, the biggest hurdle is just understanding how to use the tool, all the features, and that sort of takes a little time to understand. When John Tesmer or Jeff talk about drawers, had no idea what drawers were. I thought it, had scarves and things in it, but they're not. And so once you learn that, then for me, the second big challenge is then what Jeff, I think, calls governance is, okay, well, how are you going to use this? How are you going to set this up and understand what you're going to focus on, the reason you're focusing on it, the permissions you're giving around it, and that requires kind of the second half of what Jeff talked about, is that you really have to start moving towards that process strategy. MOSAIQ alone, can only enable a bunch of mess if you don't have it organized.
And let me give you kind of an example. I'll use APQC and how we use MOSAIQ. And how we intend to use it more effectively in the future, because we're an organization just like all of y'all in your organizations. And so if we look at over time APQC and our process knowledge, we leverage the framework. We've been proponents of it for decades. But what we find is some of that process knowledge is out in the SharePoint site. Some of that process knowledge is on a directory or a server over here. Some of that process knowledge is on someone's laptop, not shared anywhere. And there's multiple places over time that we've captured and stored information about what we do and how we do it. And again, while it may be lined back to the framework, the question becomes, how do we now leverage that effectively? So one of our initiatives, and Cindy knows this, is that we plan to migrate all of our process knowledge into a clean, consistent MOSAIQ environment. But that takes time. If we stopped all of the work we're doing and said, everybody get it all migrated into MOSAIQ, well, it may take a week, it may take a month, it may take 2 months. But we can't stop everything. So our approach internally is to do that in a slow, steady fashion. And the first way to do that is we know where that content exists. So if we've structured the framework and the framework views in MOSAIQ, and we know who's accountable for those particular processes, they can now go and talk to the key people around APQC and say, where does this content exist today? And we can simply link to where it is. Now, through MOSAIQ, we can find all of the content, regardless of where it is. And then slowly over time, in this case, we can take advantage of the cloud-based storage in MOSAIQ, and when necessary or when appropriate, we can move the content off of that SharePoint site or off of that directory or off of someone's laptop and move it into this cloud-based consistent storage. So we'll be able to leverage the organizational and the connectedness of our content, and over time actually get into a more structured cloud-based storage where it's all stored in the same location, where we get all of the backups and the recovery management and other factors for content that might not be there consistent for those disparate sources of where the information resides. So at APQC, we're slowly going through. We didn't just throw everything in there right away as the tool became available last year. We're in a structured approach for how we do that migration. And we're taking our time and we're doing it right. But that takes time to sit back and say, how are we going to do it? When are we going to do it? And not just back to strategic alignment, do it because we can, but do it because we're getting benefit from it. And it's the right time to do it. So those are some of the decisions you have to make to use MOSAIQ effectively. And APQC has had to go through that same thought process. And guess what? There's still some changes. We're learning ourselves. What works best for us may not be what we're seeing works best for Unicommer or BAE or some other organization, because we all have to look internally to what we're doing, why we're doing it, how we do it, and decide the best way to leverage this tool set and environment and the concept of a process framework to fit your business needs. So we can share and collaborate, and there's a number of those things on the weekly MOSAIQ calls where people get together and do share what we're learning and how we're using it and how we can transfer that to others. So great opportunities there. I'm going to stop talking again and see if there's some additional questions or some dialogue or some stories that you might want to share with the group on the call.
Thanks, Jeff. I know we've had, I know Mark Johnson, I think you've been on, and I know you're looking at this from a kind of different point of view, not only from industry perspective, but from associations that you're part of and everything. Anything specific that you might need to get? Mark may not still be on.
Hi, Cindy. It's Mark. Yeah, I'm here.
Hey.
And yeah, you're right. I think there may be a couple other of us from the organization on the call as well. I forwarded off the invitation to that. But yeah, we were just online, just listening to learn a little bit more about MOSAIQ and how it might apply for our external benchmarking organization. And well, that's really why we're here. Just trying to soak it up and what it potentially could do for us.
Yeah. Good. And anything you have questions around, or is it pretty clear cut? I know we've spent a lot of time talking about the value proposition and how to perhaps position it for you. Any specific questions for Jeff?
Not at this point. We are actually going to be meeting with John next week, and I think he's going to give us an overview of potentially what it might be able to do for us at that time.
Very good. Well, here's my words of advice with him. Tell him to slow down when he shows it to you, because you know you have somebody who birthed the baby and dressed it and grew it up and has it walk, and he moves too fast. So say slow. We want to look at it all.
Very good.
Yeah.
Good advice. Thank you.
Joining us this morning. Jeff and I are hoping to do more of these. I think he made such a good point. We ourselves, you get this enabler that gives you this environment to do all of this, and you think, oh boy, and you just want to jump in, and then you sort of have to hit the pause button. And that's been our learning through all of this, is that you really have to understand, going back to the business, the intent, how it's going to really work, and get yourself organized before you can really jump in. I know our KM crowd has been a little bit slow. Our process crowd has jumped right in. Our KM crowd has been a little bit slower because they don't all have necessarily the process background or that understanding. So it's a dimension that we're really trying to push and hit on the sweet spots of, again, those community connections, lessons learned, and so forth. Okay, well, good to talk to you, Mark. Jeff, I don't know. I think that we don't have a lot of questions. I think people just wanted some great information, and I'll follow up with people and get them some stuff that they might need. So any final thoughts?
You know, in some cases, going in and just exploring and playing with the tool will give you some ideas. Talking with John, talking with myself. I think the key thing there is that if you have a goal of more targeted, sustainable process management within your organization, and you want people to start to rally around a common enterprise framework, then there's more work to do than just say, go use MOSAIQ. And much of what I talked about in this accelerator concept, doing that health check and going in and designing how you're actually going to use it to avoid people going and doing it different ways and creating some clutter or confusion, which we sometimes see. That's really what we were trying to stress today with Accelerator itself. You can't just blindly jump in here and hope it's going to solve your problems. The tool doesn't solve your problems. It can help you to solve your problems as long as you understand how you intend to use the tool. And that's really important. Understand what the tool can do and all the flexibility it provides, and then understand where it fits and how you're going to use it, and then do that in a structured and successful way. So those pieces come together, and we find a number of organizations that want to use the tool, and they struggle with that. So how do we put it into effect? And that's where Accelerator, the concepts of Accelerator, just like any other product or service offering, go through a structured, let's understand, discover, or assess. Let's design our solution, implement our solution, and support our solution. It's really not rocket science when it comes down to that.
Very good. Well, thank you, guys. We're going to be doing some more of these, so I hope you all will join us, and we really appreciate everyone who is on today. Sarah?
Absolutely, and if you have direct questions, again, John Tesmer, Sarah, Cindy, myself, reach out to any of us. We're there to support you, and really hope that you can find some value and find accelerated value through the concepts that are here.
Thank you all. Have a good day.
Thanks. Bye-bye.